What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, I wanted to showcase some of the newly buffed Blastoise in the Open Ultra League. This Pokemon has waited so long to get its spot in GBL. Venusaur and Charizard, two of its fellow starters, have been very good in different metas in the past, and we even see a ton of Water-type starters like Swampert, Feraligatr, even Empoleon and Samurott have had their time in the sun. Blastoise now is able to join them and is a very fun pick. So let's take a look at the battles and see what this team can do. Alright, let's get right on into it. First game of the day, Blastoise up against Golisopod. We have super effective rollout here, but it's not as comfortable of a matchup as I'd like it to be. With that said, our opponent instantly swaps out to a Shadowdon fan of all things. This is not the worst matchup to be in. I can go for a Hydro Cannon and come in with our Grass-type Pokemon, Virizion. At this point, I do have to wonder, though, why did they instantly swap out? It's not like Golisopod's that bad of a matchup, and swapping into a Ground-type, into a Water-type is a very interesting play. Might be another Ground-type in the back. We no shield expecting a Body Slam, but no, a Play Rough comes through, does a massive amount of damage to our Virizion, but because we are so bulky here and Ground-type damage does almost nothing to us, we can survive long enough to reach this Leaf Blade, knock them out, and might even have enough HP to reach this Stone Edge to do critical damage to this Golisopod. I know at this point I could run Sacred Sword on our Virizion, but I like Stone Edge coverage for some of these less good matchups, especially like Talonflame is fantastic to have that one-shot potential against, and that extra damage was so good here. I actually end up calling a second Ground-type in the back, so I come in with our Shadow Galarian Weezing, and sure enough, in the backline is a Shadow Hippowdon. Our Blastoise at this point will spam out as many Hydro Cannons as we can get to, but because Hippowdon is a little bit bulkier than that Donphan that we saw earlier this game, it might survive a Hydro Cannon, especially if they get a Scorching Sands attack drop. In comes the Scorching, we shield it up, and now we're very close to another Hydro Cannon, but at this point, our opponent has very little hope. If I land this move, which I am going to be able to right now, then they are in range where even our Shadow Weezing can take him out with just a single Brutal Swing, maybe even with just Fairy Wind damage. They do throw a charge move right before I reach this next Hydro Cannon, but I think I might even survive this Scorching Sands. We no shield, we do live, we throw the Hydro, they catch on their Golisopod, but they had a decent amount of energy that they are now sacking by coming in with this right now. In comes the Hydro, in comes our Weezing. Now they realize not much they can do against a full health and shield advantage Weezing. Alright, next matchup here, a Galarian Weezing of our opponents against our Blastoise. Very neutral matchup, but you have to keep in mind, this is one of the better matchups to be in, saying our Virizion doesn't want to see this at all. In comes a charge move. That was only 4 Fairy Winds actually, so it was just a Brutal Swing coming through. Easily can no-shield that, go for a Hydro Cannon here, and start chipping down this Poison and Fairy-type Pokemon. Hydro Cannon coming through, our opponent does let it go. It doesn't quite two-shot, but after a couple more fast moves, they will be in range where the next Hydro Cannon could potentially knock them out. In comes a Lapras safe swap. I am going to safe swap, or counter swap rather, with my Virizion, and see what moveset they're going to run. Virizion does have to watch out for these Psy Waves, obviously, they are super effective, but also Skull Bash or Ice Beam could do quite a bit of damage to us. With that said, I think I can still survive no matter what they throw. I'm going to no-shield and see what they're going to do. I don't want to give this Weezing a huge farm down as well. They go for a Skull Bash, it does a lot of damage, but at this point, if I were to just knock them out, it would put them into a range where that Weezing would get a huge amount of energy. I don't want to let that happen because Blastoise and Weezing don't really soak that energy too well. Leaf Blade does end up knocking him out here, and I can reach a Leaf Blade once again against this Galarian Weezing. At this point, I do want to swap out. I don't want to give them this much of an energy lead, and it feels like Blastoise is pretty good into their team with how they played out this game so far. We have the Hydro Cannon, we go for the combo play, they don't end up calling it here, and they have to shield the Hydro Cannon. They're staying in just a little bit longer here, and because of the fact that they stayed in and threw a Brutal Swing, I'm going to no-shield once again, expecting them to likely have Overheat as their secondary charge move. They make a nice catch on a Golisopod, but because we are still in a pretty good spot here with rollout damage and even just potentially baiting with the Skull Bash here, we are able to overfarm, put them in a little bit of trouble, and potentially win this game in the back with our Shadow Galarian Weezing. X-Scissor does end up getting a shield from us, but at this point, rollout is doing quite a bit of damage to them. I am at back-to-back Hydro Cannon. I'm going to bait that. I'm going to go for the Skull Bash here. They can't really no-shield this. If they do, that's a crazy play. Our opponent realizing that ends up shielding, and now we are almost at the Skull Bash. We can shield this up and overfarm just a little bit more, go for the Skull Bash when we can. They're not quite at a move yet, and this Weezing, they can snipe us down if they want to, but that is all of their energy down the drain if they end up doing that. They're going to try to land a move against our Weezing. I'm expecting at this point probably an Overheat, right? We have seen them throw interesting moves all game. It's been Brutal Swing against our other Pokemon. We make a nice catch. Is this an Overheat? It is going to be one. We make a fantastic catch here. Now we can overfarm with our Shadow Galarian Weezing. Because I saw they weren't throwing Sludge against our Blastoise, I almost knew for certain it was Overheat on this thing, so absolutely critical catch. We end up knocking them out with a Brutal Swing, and now a Sludge should be more than enough to knock out the Golisopod. They realize that and end up top lefting. Alright, next game here, a Pangoro in the lead. Very interesting matchup. Not exactly the worst matchup for Blastoise, but rollout is resisted, so I'm going to swap out saying I have 2 better answers in the back. We end up, unfortunately, baiting out a Tentacruel Pokemon, which is a little bit tricky for our backline. Even, honestly, our Blastoise is not all that good into it, so I'm going to try our best to whittle this Pokemon down with these Brutal Swings and see what they want to do. Likely they will throw a Scald. I'm hoping for no attack drop here, because these Brutal Swings, honestly, are doing quite a bit of damage. They actually went for a CMP against us, but at this point, I'm going to no-shield and try to get as much chip damage as I can before getting completely poison jabbed tap down. They could have Sludge Wave on this Pokemon, which would be a little bit interesting. I go for the Sludge here. I didn't know at the time. I was like wondering if this would do a little bit more damage. I checked after the fact. It does 1 less damage actually than Poodle Swing, so don't go for Sludge against these Tentacruels. But I just wanted to check just to make sure our opponent, if they have Sludge Wave, could do quite a bit of damage to Blastoise, but they're going to throw a Charge Move. It is just a Scald actually, so we can easily survive that, overfarm even more energy, and because Pangoro was what was in the lead, it's not like Blastoise is even that weak to it. If I can get a lot of energy here, maybe even some energy on Virizion, we could be in a pretty good spot here at the end of the game. Scald ends up doing almost nothing to us here. I swap into my Virizion, and they counter-swap their Pangoro of all things. Very interesting play. Obviously, I do not have Sacred Sword, but Leaf Blade is going to do the job as well, especially with these super effective double kicks. Our opponent respects the charge move, and they end up throwing an attack of their own right now. In comes likely a close combat, but it could be a Night Slash bait. I'm going to respect it, go for the shield. It was a close combat, and I'm going to immediately fire off the Leaf Blade. I don't want them to get another shield from us before I can get a shield from them. In comes the knockout against this Pangoro. What are they going to bring in? I have so much energy across the board. I still have a shield. What are they going to do? They're going to top left, and we can take the win. GG's to our opponent. All right, next game, a Rune in the lead. Very interesting matchup here. Obviously, this Pokemon does have access to these Rock Tombs and Shadow Balls that you see so much in the new meta. I go for the instant throw, expecting them not to expect that, but they make a fantastic catch here on their Blastoise. With that said, Virizion can just as well come in here, go for Leaf Blades, and try their best to knock this Pokemon out. I know they did drain all of my energy from Blastoise, but at this point, all I need to do is land a Leaf Blade against that Rune in the lead to be able to get my energy back. They survive on 1 HP with this Shadow Blastoise. What is this going to be? Skull Bash or Ice Beam? It is an Ice Beam, does a critical amount of damage there. We can survive it. We're actually outside of range where even like a Brutal Swing from this Rune could knock us out. I go for a Leaf Blade, trying to get a shield or as much damage as we can. They do let it go, and at this point, they're going to be forced to throw energy pretty early on if they don't want to end up taking another Leaf Blade. They actually go for a CMP here, so I'm going to shield this up, go for Leaf Blade of my own. I honestly had no idea who won CMP in this matchup, so kind of interesting to see that it is this Rune that ends up winning it. Leaf Blade draws a shield, and our opponent at this point will either have to go for a full farm down or maybe throw energy. If they can, I get to yet another Leaf Blade, and at this point, they're in a little bit of trouble. They have to shield this if they want to keep this energy, but if they do, I can come back in Blastoise and start spamming out charge moves. They end up swapping out and into a very tricky Pokemon actually for our team, especially once our Virizion is down. With that said, Virizion not having Sacred Sword is not the best matchup here, so I'm actually pretty soft to Registeel as a whole, but I think Blastoise should be able to put in quite a bit of work here, spam out Hydro Cannons, and put them into a range where our Shadow Galarian Weezing should be able to close out this backline. And despite the fact that they have a Ghost and Ground-type Pokemon in the backline, they don't actually have any good Ground-type coverage on that Pokemon, so as long as our Weezing is not going to be able to take a Focus Blast, or a Zap Cannon rather, we should be in a very good spot. We go for our third Hydro Cannon. Is this going to put them into Brutal Swing range? I have to hope that it is. Hydro Cannon lands, and now we can swap out to our Weezing, go for Brutal Swings, and see what our opponent is going to do. I know that this probably does about as much damage as a Shadow Ball, so I'm going to end up letting this go, just because I think Rune would do a little bit more damage to me, but honestly, that Zap Cannon does a massive amount, but I can still build up to back-to-back Brutal Swings, throw one against this Registeel, one against the Rune when it comes back in, and we should be able to win this game. Brutal Swing knocks out the Reggie. Is it enough to knock out Rune? They're pretty low at this point. It's super effective. It's a Shadow Galarian Weezing. This should be enough. I throw the move. It does knock out, and we can take the win against a very interesting team. All right, next matchup here, we're going to see a Blastoise up against a Shadow Dragonite. Very good matchup. It might not be the best matchup on paper in the Zero Shield, but because I know we are such a spammy Pokemon, and Rollout is actually super effective against this Dragon and Flying-type Pokemon, I can no-shield this, go for back-to-back Hydro Cannons, and make it so they have to shield-resisted moves, or potentially even just bait an Ice Beam or a Skull Bash here. In comes a Hydro. Do they shield this up, or do they just let it go? Hydro being thrown, our opponent opts to no-shield the move, but I can outpace before the next charge attack is reached from this Dragonite, and try to draw a shield or get a KO against this Pokemon. Hydro Cannon comes through and gets the knockout. Our opponent brings in their own Blastoise to try to farm us down. I don't really want to let them get that farm down, saying if they were so weak to Blastoise that not only did they stay in that lead matchup, but they brought in their own Blastoise to try to minimize the amount of damage we can have. I want to keep it around for later, just in case a Hydro Cannon could be potentially useful. With that said, I know in the back, a lot of these have, like, I don't know, Gastrodon in the back. It could have been a risky swap, but our opponent is staying in, which means that we aren't going to be completely hard countered. I'm going to shield this Hydro. It would knock us out at this point, but because our Shadow Galarian Weezing is so spammy, I can overfarm a ton of energy, but I think they can reach another Hydro before we can knock them out. I don't think a Sludge would have been quite enough, so instead of throwing the charge move and wasting energy, I'm going to overfarm until I'm at a point where I know a Sludge would knock them out. I go for a Sludge now. If they do end up shielding this move, I have a second one. If they no-shield, it will knock out, and I can use all of this energy against whatever their final Pokemon is going to be. Well, unfortunately for us, it is going to be a Skeleturge, which means that our Blastoise would have quite a bit of play, but we are down shields, and our Virizion is going to have to try its best to win this endgame matchup. With that said, I know that I can spam out these Brutal Swings. I already got one shield. I need to get a second this game if I want any chance of winning this match. I'm going to be one Fairy Wind away from my Brutal Swing, so keep that in mind in the backline. I end up forcing energy against our Blastoise, and since we have Stone Edge on our Virizion, there is still a win condition for us this game. They ramp up with the Torch Song, which is a little bit scary, but our opponent at this point is going to have to be very careful with when they throw charge moves. I do have a Stone Edge, and as long as I can survive this Torch Song and only give them one extra Incinerate of energy, then I can reach both a Stone Edge and a Brutal Swing in the backline. I think at this point, our opponent's only win condition is trying to call that I don't have Stone Edge here, because if they end up shielding this, I can get into a Brutal Swing in the backline. They try to no-shield, but unfortunately for them, I have Stone Edge. GG's. We get to the one shot, I guess, against that Skeleturge. All right, next matchup going to be, honestly, a very awkward core breaker to see. I know that Florges is not a grass-type Pokemon, but it has access to Trailblaze, and because it's also a fairy-type, our Virizion does not want to see this in the back. Our Shadow Galarian Weezing would be fantastic here. It resists everything they could throw, but because we cannot get that switch advantage right yet, we're going to go for a Skull Bash and try to raise our defense while they're raising their attack. This is going to make it so we can survive the next Trailblaze pretty easily, win the Zero Shield matchup, and potentially get some sort of advantage later on for Virizion. Also, landing that Skull Bash puts them into Leaf Blade range, so if they do opt to shield this next Hydro Cannon here, they're going to have to end up shielding a Leaf Blade later on this match if they want to knock out our Virizion. I would also assume they're running Moonblast on this Florges as their other coverage move, and since they shield up that attack, I don't want to give them a huge farm down. We come with our Shadow Galarian Weezing, and for some reason, our opponent's counter swap to that is going to be a Jellicent. This Pokemon by no means is even close to a threat here. I can go for one Brutal Swing, I can go for another one in just a second. Our opponent, though, going for a move after 4 Hexes, that's only a Surf, and at this point, I can no-shield this, I can survive, go for another Brutal Swing in just a second, and knock out this Jellicent. This move won't quite knock him out from full HP here, but I can go for another one, following it up very closely after because of how spammy Galarian Weezing is, and our opponent is going to have to shield this if they want any chance of knocking us out. I go for the CMP here. If they want to shield this, they can be my guess. That would be down 2 shields against a Virizion, which generally should be a good matchup for us. Our opponent, though, for some reason comes back in with the Florges. I'm going to shield up whatever charge move this is, likely a Trailblaze, and try to Fairy Wind down. I actually don't think I can quite get the Fairy Wind down, but Blastoise is still remaining in the back. We can go for a nice catch here, and now farm them down even more with our Galarian Weezing. We already have a ton of energy on that Pokemon, but what do they have in the back? Do we have any chance of winning this game? I have to hope that we do. Galarian Weezing here, rather, has a ton of energy. We go for our Weezing once again. Our opponent brings in a Fortress, so I guess they must have assumed that I am running Overheat, and they didn't want to come in with a Pokemon that could potentially get one shot here, which I guess makes sense, but because our opponent made the wrong 50-50 call on which of their backline Pokemon to bring in, we're able to get all these Brutal Swings off against this, and then come in with our Virizion, which, if you don't really realize this off the face of things, is a hard wall to everything this Fortress is going to throw. Rock Tomb is resisted, Earthquake is resisted, and same with these Volt Switches. Everything they're throwing is only resisted damage, meaning they have nothing that they can use to hit us against. I have Stone Edge as well. Sacred Sword would be slightly better for us in this matchup, but Stone Edge is still neutral, and because our opponent, once again, only has neutral attacks here, or resisted rather, there is nothing they can do. They will lower my attack with these Rock Tombs, but they are doing nothing to me. Our opponent, realizing that game is lost, they end up top lefting. GG's to them. All right, next matchup, we're going to see a Malamar in the lead up against our Blastoise. Very neutral matchup here. It is a little bit awkward depending on how they play it out. I'm going to try to go for a Skull Bash here. Actually, our opponent, though, swapping out to a Lapras before I can even get that move off. So ABA Sidewave users from our opponent right now. I have a Leaf Blade ready to go. This is going to two-shot them, but if they do have Ice Beam, this matchup gets a little bit sketchier than I'd like it to. But because I know that our Blastoise in the backline has so much energy, we should be in a pretty good spot. I'm going to shield just in case it's an Ice Beam, and for once it actually is, so a very good shield by us. I'm going to instantly throw this Leaf Blade and see what our opponent wants to do. I'm not really that worried about that Malamar in the backline because our Weezing does, in theory, resist all of the energy that they have. They end up shielding that Leaf Blade. They go for an Ice Beam, and we're going to see just how much this attack is going to do to a Virizion. We no shield. We actually survive. We reach this Leaf Blade, which they end up catching on Malamar. Honestly, I'm pretty happy with that. It's going to be a lot of chip damage that I can get off into them here and put them close to Skull Bash range. If I can land this attack here, I know I can roll out them all the way down. Our opponent, no shields, which is fantastic. Now we can be able to overfarm, get a ton of energy coming out of this matchup. We have +1 to our defense, so these Foul Plays, these superpowers, even these Sideways are going to do so much less damage to us. We can see we just tank that so incredibly easy here. At this point, our opponent better go for superpower because they're not going to get to another move, and it would do a bit more raw damage. They do realize that, and they go for the heavier hitting attack. We get that full rollout down. Who are they going to bring in? Maybe the Lapras to try to drain our energy, or maybe we'll see the final Pokemon depending on how they want to play this out. Our opponent opponent does actually bring in their final Pokemon. It's a Cobalion, which is great for us to see because we have our Weezing in the backline that can resist fighting type damage, but they make a fantastic catch on this Lapras. I get a bit of a rollout down here after the fact, so we get a bit of our energy back. In comes that Cobalion once again, and we have yet another Hydro Cannon ready to go. This should do a decent chunk of damage. I do need to land a Charge Move here if I want any chance of winning this game. We can at this point go for a shield on this Sacred Sword because our Weezing has no Charge Move pressure against us, and try our best to win this endgame. In comes the Hydro Cannon. Our opponent is going to have to knock us out with another Sacred Sword here, likely, before we are going to be able to get to another Hydro Cannon. Our opponent is going for this full farm down. I try to go for a catch, but they don't throw, and I just realized I don't actually have a Hydro Cannon loaded on our Blastoise. After you throw a Charge Move, normally it's only 3 more rollouts to your next Charge Move, but if you go for a Skull Bash, only your next 3 Hydro Cannons are discounted, meaning I was a full 4 rollouts away. I give this Cobalion so much extra energy. Blastoise is not getting to another Hydro Cannon. I have miscalculated this endgame, and it is looking like this one might be a loss. I'm going to go for this Brutal Swing, see how much damage we can do here, but they are very close to another Stone Edge. We saw the first one did way over half of our HP. I can't even catch. I already tried to catch on Virizion, so this is looking more than over at this point. Our opponent definitely played out that game pretty well. Unfortunately for us, we were not able to overcome it, and they got us in the end. GG's. All right, next matchup, a Cradily in the lead. Bit of an interesting Pokemon to see. Blastoise does not want to see this at all, but we have our Shadow Galarian Weezing, and of course our Virizion in the backline, which is a hard counter to all of their energy. Sludge is going to come through. Our opponent at this point will have to shield this if they want to have a good matchup the longer this goes, because obviously they're going to start spamming out these Rock Tombs, and it seems like they are content to just staying in. Rock Tomb number 1 lands. They will be able to 2-shot us here with Rock Tomb, which is kind of ridiculous. Rock Tomb is such a stupid move, but I have another Sludge ready to go before another debuff is going to come through, and now I just want to whittle this Pokemon down as much as we can to make it so maybe if I need to lose this matchup, I can at the very least lose it with enough HP or enough chip damage against this Cradily that potentially a Hydro Cannon later on this game could knock out this Cradily. I try to catch a move. Our opponent, though, very wisely ends up over farming. They don't fall for the catch, and they come in with a Charm Clefable of all things. I know that we have Leaf Blade, which will spam out quite a bit of damage against them, but Charm is never what you want to see as a fighting type Pokemon. Another Leaf Blade has been reached. Our opponent actually throws on CMP. That is only going to be a Swift at this point. It's non-stab, won't do too much damage, but it will put us into range where potentially the next 2 charms will knock us out. If we do get knocked out by two charms, that is, we are going to end up wasting a ton of energy. But if we can survive them, which it's going to be so close, we end up actually reaching this next Leaf Blade, either knocking out Clefable or drawing our opponent's final shield. They do opt to let it go, which I guess does make sense here, but now I do have to worry about that Cradily potentially sweeping us with all that energy in the back. They come in with a Shadow Drifloon, though, so it's not Double Charm. I was kind of thinking when I saw the team comp that it would be Double Charm. I go for the instant Sludge when I see that Cradily come back in, and at this point, this game should, in theory, be a win for us as long as we can manage our energy properly. I can shield this up. We landed a non-debuffed Sludge, and now we can Fairy Wind them all the way down right before their next Rock Tomb, go for a Brutal Swing against this Drifblim, and potentially start chipping them down into range where our Blastoise in the backline should be able to win. We don't have Ice Beam on our Blastoise, but after landing that Brutal Swing, despite the debuff, we have chipped them down well into range where a Hydro Cannon plus a rollout damage should be enough to knock them out. We get to yet another Brutal Swing, drawing their final shield, and now our Blastoise has some work to do. Are we able to win this game? We get denied a turn, so that's one less rollout of damage and energy that we get. I don't think that it's going to matter, though. We can tank this Shadow Ball. We can go for a Hydro Cannon here in just a second. Shadow Drifblim is not a bulky Pokemon. Hydro Cannon should still be enough to knock them out and take us the win in this game. Hydro Cannon comes through, knocks out the Drifblim. GG's to our opponent. All right, next matchup. What are we going to see? A Shadow Drapion in the lead. This is a very neutral matchup, obviously. They can spam out Crunches. If they get a debuff, they can actually 2-shot us with Crunch, which is honestly kind of ridiculous, saying Blastoise is supposed to be bulky. But because defense drops are so pivotal in these games, it is going to be kind of interesting to see what happens. They end up going for a fantastic catch with their Malamar. At this point, I do have 2 Pokemon in the backline that could kind of deal with this. Virizion, despite taking super effective Psywave damage, does do well into Virizion, mainly because we know that they have to throw Superpower against us, but I go with our Galarian Weezing instead, knowing that we resist all of the Charge Move, and I can go for an Overfarm with our Blastoise, so we have a lot of energy in the back. Foul Play does a decent amount of damage despite being resisted, because Shadow Galarian Weezing is not the bulkiest Pokemon in the game. Sludge is going to come through. Our opponent would have to shield this up if they want to keep all of their energy, which they do end up shielding, and at this point, I would have to shield if I want to reach another charge attack of our own. Our opponent is throwing a Foul Play likely against us. I shield it up, and I'm going to try to go for a Sludge against them if I can. They might shield this, they might not. If they want Switch, they can actually shield this and farm us all the way down, although that's not the worst case scenario for me. They do actually just end up letting that move through there on their Malamar, and they come in with a nice farm down with this Shadow Drapion. I know that Poison is generally an answer to Grass, but I'm thinking at this point they likely only have Aqua Tail and Crunch. All of this energy is going to go nowhere against our Virizion. We can drain the attacks here, hopefully use our energy on Blastoise in the backline against whatever they have, but our opponent is one step ahead of us. They have their own Virizion, and because I would assume they're not on Stone Edge, this matchup is so bad for us. We only have resisted charge moves to throw. Our double kicks are neutral, but because we have Blastoise and likely a Sacred Sword Virizion fighting our regular Virizion, this is a massive core breaker. Yeah, Sacred Sword coming through there. This is looking a little bit rough. I've been able to use Stone Edge a couple times to get nice wins, but I think this is one of the first times where having Stone Edge rather than Sacred Sword might just lose us this game. I'm not able to shield this move. I kind of have to shield if I want to get this Leaf Blade off. It would not be enough, though, to knock them out, and they could likely double kick us all the way down. Instead, I'm going to invest in our Blastoise and just hope I can land this Skull Bash, reach enough Hydro Cannons to knock out this Drapion, and just hope at this point that we can win this game. They go for a charge move. I have to hope after that defense increase that we can survive a Crunch and the Poison Sting damage. We no shield, but unfortunately, that is so much damage despite the increased defense. We cannot reach 2 Hydro Cannons. Our opponent able to farm us all the way down. GG's to them. All right, next game, another Drapion in the lead. This time, though, the non-Shadow, a very interesting Pokemon to see, mainly because the non-Shadow Drapion is generally going to run a different moveset. I've seen a lot of these non-Shadows running Crunch and Sludge Bomb, which would be kind of interesting here. I know that 2 Hydro Cannons, though, will still do quite a bit of damage. It won't quite get a 2-shot from full HP, but because they're the non-Shadow, they also won't do anywhere near as much damage to us. And comes a Crunch likely against our Blastoise. We don't get debuffed, which is always nice to see. They throw yet another charge attack, which is basically all of their energy. And at this point, they're below half HP. I will be after this charge move, but because I want to save that energy, I'm going to come in with our Shadow Galarian Weezing and see what they want to do. They throw a charge move. It could be an Aqua Tail or a Sludge. Let's see what moveset they're running. It is just an Aqua Tail, so it does very little damage, and at this point, I can go for a charge move against this, try to knock them out, and see if we can drain all of their energy and get a bit of an energy lead with our Galarian Weezing. Sludge comes through. Is it enough to knock out? A 1 HP survive is exactly what we did not want to see there. Now, we're only going to get 1 Fairy Wind for our troubles, and we're going to take a full-on Aqua Tail, which is not what we wanted to see at all. In comes a Drifblim, though. Drifblim is not the worst Pokemon to see, and honestly, it's a good thing that we baited this out so our Virizion doesn't have to see it. I'm going to come in now with our Blastoise, go for a Hydro Cannon, and see how they want to play this game out. Hydro would likely come close to knocking them out here. They actually let it go, interestingly enough, which means we get a full rollout down, and now we might be able to get another Hydro Cannon against something in the back. That something is going to be a Zygarde Pokemon, which is basically the bulkiest Pokemon in the entire Ultra League meta, and because Hydro Cannon is a strong move, our opponent, I guess, does decide to shield. It could have been an Ice Beam, potentially. I actually don't know if I was at that energy, but I think our opponent is going to play it safe here and see what they can do with Zygarde. In comes our Virizion. I know our lose condition at this point is no shielding and outrage. Our opponent does have a ton of energy. It could be an outrage. I'm going to respect it now, shield up this charge move, and see what they're going to throw. It is an outrage, so fantastic shield by us here. I'm going to try our best to go for a Leaf Blade. I'm trying to wait a turn. It's not working at all. Visual's not updating, which gives them the ability to catch on their Drapion. Worst case scenario for us right now, but this Leaf Blade will knock them out, I guess. And I still have so much energy here. I also have my Shadow Galarian Weezing, which is well outside of range where I would get knocked out with Dragon Tail damage, so I think Virizion with charge move spam, especially if I shield up the proper moves, could still win us this game. I'm at back-to-back Leaf Blades right now, so as long as I shield up whatever move they're going to throw, I can reach a second move, and they have to go for a full-on outrage to knock out my Virizion, meaning a Brutal Swing from our Shadow Galarian Weezing in the backline should be enough to knock them out. So I'm going to shield this up. They do go for a Bulldoze, so we see the full moveset reveal. They do also get a defense drop against us, but because we are still pretty bulky, they're going to have to go for an outrage nonetheless, despite that debuff. Our opponent is going to let us reach a Leaf Blade. I think they're trying to hope that I was going to go for a catch, but unfortunately for them, I don't go for it. I just go straight for the charge move, and even if they did knock us out, as I've been saying, our Weezing in the back should have been able to close that one out. GG's to them. Next matchup, we're going to see our Blastoise in the lead up against a Guzzlord. Not the best lead. Honestly, our backline has a lot of play into this, but if we need to later on, we do have Skull Bash, we have Rollout as well, so it's not the worst case scenario for a Blastoise to be in, but our opponent, unfortunately for us, ends up having the Gastrodon here for our Shadow Galarian Weezing. The worst thing about this is they've already had 2 Pokemon pretty weak to Virizion right now. I would have to imagine whatever their third Pokemon is either a Flying type, a Fire type, some sort of hard answer to our Grass and Fighting type Pokemon, which is not at all what I want to see here. I know at this point I could probably go for a Brutal Swing and knock this Pokemon out, or maybe draw a shield at the very least. I want to get at least 1 shield down this game so that Guzzlord, if I do get locked in with my Blastoise later on, will not end up being forced to get shielded with his Skull Bashes. In comes the charge move against us. I go for the CMP, and thankfully the Body Slam is going to almost knock us out. They get 1 extra Body Slam, and I'm going to come in with our Virizion and try to get a full farm down. Our opponent is staying in here. Obviously, they must have a hard answer for a Virizion in the backline, or at the very least, they do want to avoid this matchup with the Guzzlord. Let's see what they're going to have. Body Slam does almost nothing to us here. I'm just going to commit to a full farm down. I do kind of wish right now that I had Sacred Sword just in case they do bring back in that Guzzlord. Another Body Slam has been reached. Our opponent is throwing a Body Slam against us, and it does, honestly, a bit more damage than I'd like. I'm well below half HP. Our Virizion has a ton of work to do. Elisapod actually is their final Pokemon, so honestly, a little bit triple weak to Virizion, especially Virizion with the Stone Edge charge attack. Our opponent at this point is going to have to start shielding up Leaf Blades or just let their Golisopod go completely down. They just no-shield the move at this point. In comes a Guzzlord, rather, and I am going to go for a Leaf Blade bait. I don't know if they're going to shield this or not, but I know at this point I just need to get as much chip damage against this as I can to make it so much easier for our Blastoise to take out. Our opponent does now go for a Dragon Claw or a Brutal Swing to try to knock us out, but I'm going to shield this, get a couple more double kicks of damage against them, and then see what they're going to do. Stone Edge at this point won't knock out, but if they no-shield this for one reason or another, I think I can just roll out down and win the rest of the game with our Blastoise's fast move pressure. They do no-shield hoping for just another Leaf Blade, but unfortunately for them, it was a Stone Edge. It does almost knock them out, and because Blastoise is such a bulky Pokemon, even if they get to a ton of charge moves here, I can just farm them all the way down and farm down the Golisopod to take the win against a very tricky lead. All right, next matchup, we're going to see Blastoise up against a Shadow Typhlosion. Fantastic lead here. Rollout is super effective, and for one reason or another, they are staying in one of the worst matchups they could possibly be in. We are such a spammy Water-type Pokemon. Obviously, they do have Thunder Punch that could do quite a bit of damage to us, but because Blastoise is so spammy and so bulky, I'm pretty sure I can no-shield one, go for another Hydro Cannon in just a second here, and be very confident in the way we can win this matchup. Our opponent comes in here with a Golisopod. I don't really have a great counter swap to this. Blastoise is supposed to be our answer here, so I'm going to go for a Skull Bash, try to draw a shield, or do a massive amount of damage. They actually let them move through, which does make sense. They're already down one shield. They don't want to go down a second, and now I'm going to no-shield this over from just a little bit of energy with our Shadow Galarian Weezing, throw a Brutal Swing to knock them out, and then try to throw a Brutal Swing against that Typhlosion if they do come back in with it. I know even with the amount of damage that we've done to that Shadow Typhlosion with our rollouts, they're probably outside of range where I could knock them out with a Brutal Swing, but if I can ever land this attack, then I can guarantee you that I can knock them out with either double kicks or rollouts later on this game. In comes a Brutal Swing. Our opponent does no-shield the attack. It does a massive amount of damage, and unfortunately for them, they have a Blastoise in the back, which is not at all what you want to see. If I have a Virizion, I can go for a Brutal Swing just to kind of stall the switch clock there, so I can instantly now swap into our Virizion and spam out these Leaf Blades. The first one will be thrown. Our opponent is going to have to shield this because they have no other Pokemon to hide behind at this point. They end up no-shielding. I think at this point, they might have just realized this game is a little bit over. I can survive no matter what they're going to throw. An Ice Beam, I guess, honestly, it is super effective, but it doesn't even put us into the red HP here. I can go for a CMP on this next charge move, and this Leaf Blade should be more than enough to knock out this Blastoise. Leaf Blade being thrown, our opponent does finally shield up this move, and because now there is only a low HP Blastoise and Typhlosion, we should be able to win this game just with fast move pressure for the rest of this match. Our opponent throws a charge move, but I know I survive a Thunder Punch, and a Blast Burn, if they throw it, is a ton of energy. I no shield, I can now double kick down this Typhlosion, I can double kick down with this Blastoise as well, or even just throw a charge move, and we should have this game. Leaf Blade being thrown. At this point, our opponent has nothing to hide behind. Blastoise ends up getting knocked out, and we survive that game with 3 Pokemon intact. GG's to our opponents today. Very fun set of battles just in general with this Blastoise. Honestly, I'm not the best Blastoise user out there, but it is such a fun Pokemon to use. I think once I start to learn some of the matchups a little bit better, and now that I know about the Skull Bash and Hydro Cannon energy synergy just a little bit more, it will help out in future battles. But thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed the battles and you want to see more content like this in the future, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a ton, and I would really appreciate it. Thank you again for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.